What you are about to hear is, I think, both frightening and profound, and it has taken me several months to reconcile his words with the reality that we are experiencing today. In perhaps an instinctual act of self-preservation, we often push away the very things that might harm or challenge our state of mind, mental health, and belief system. Jacques Ellul's ability to question deeply ingrained assumptions does precisely that. To say that this man was ahead of his time would be an understatement. He integrated sociology, philosophy, theology, and political science. And in his lifetime, he wrote more than 60 books. This is a short summary of only 4 pages. The revolution that we can anticipate is an ever greater reinforcement of the power of the state, an ever fuller subordination of human beings to their economic function, a more complete disappearance of the person within the mass. In brief, a reinforcement of the structures. We must not expect such revolution to at all improve the ill effects that we are enduring. Clearly, it has nothing to do with the hope of contemporary people.
We've built a culture where we are telling everybody else to comply with governance processes and the instrumental and intrinsic value of governance institutions. And yet those who break the law, either because they are so high up in government, they're untouchable. So high up in the military, they're untouchable. So high up in the police, they're untouchable. They, their children, their cronies, their girlfriends, and their cats seem to live with impunity. And the only people who live subjected to the reformed governance systems and laws are poor people who will never break through the glass ceiling of deified, sanctified, and elevated fiefdom.
Let us just ask you quickly, you have to choose now between Davos or Westminster.
Davos.
You can say, no, my country is small, or my country is peaceful. My country does not fight with anyone. They don't care as long as you have what they need. They are going to come and try and corrupt your politicians, corrupt your citizens. If they can't corrupt them, cause them to rebel against you. If they can't cause them to rebel against you, just cause some discontent.
What is more, we are indeed obliged to conclude that any other revolution is now impossible. This is because, in order to succeed, it would need to use the very means of today's world. Incapable of truly modifying our condition, people sacrifice themselves for the wrong reasons. The present struggles are the struggles of individuals and parties. It is merely a question of knowing who will take power. They are discussions about means, while the ends are not called into question. They are oppositions of power, but not of ways of conceiving the world. Thus, communist society is based on the same essential facts as capitalist society, and Russia obeys the same basic rules as does the US.
It is important to point out that regardless of the social system, whether fascist, socialist, capitalist, or communist, the underlying mechanism is still money, labor, and competition.
Justice is flouted as much on the right as on the left, but for different reasons. Once the premises of our civilizations are accepted, only appearances can change. Individual or state capitalism, Western or Eastern democracy, are like different suits of clothing on the same person. But the habit does not make the monk. We may well wonder, however, what in general motivates people at present to remain blind to the world we are living in.
I am constantly saying to my own party, Labour Party, which will probably win this election, you've got to focus on this technology revolution. It's not an afterthought. It's the single biggest thing that's happening in the world today of a real world nature that is going to change everything. Leave aside all the geopolitics and the conflicts and war and America, China, all the rest of it. This revolution is going to change everything about our society, our economy, the way we live, the way we interact with each other. I think we're living through a period of massive change, right? This is the biggest technological change since the Industrial Revolution, for sure. How do you use it to transform healthcare, education, the way government functions?
The motive that keeps us from calling the structures of this civilization into question is undoubtedly our respect for the fact. It is well known that other civilizations did not have the same degree of respect for facts. Facts were not viewed in the same way. Today, the fact, whatever it may be, the established fact, the material fact, is the final reason, the criterion of truth. Everything that is a fact is justified by that alone. It is thought that no judgment can be brought to bear on facts. The only thing possible is to bow before them.
The people of Rome were constantly being distracted by the gladiatorial events, and the politicians knew that they did this. Whenever there was unrest among the people, they had a huge event going on, and they created a new event with lots and lots of gladiators, and every day we're doing that. That is a common trait of declining empires. And so today in the United States, for example, you find a tremendous emphasis on all kinds of television programs that distract people from what's really going on. Sports is a big part of that, as it was in the gladiator times.
Oh, it's been left, and here's Bebeto. Bebeto still going, onside, and it's 2-0. Time to rock the baby. Bebeto's made it 2, and Brazil really all partying now.
In essence, we've been lulled into a lethargy, and we've accepted it.
And this again is typifying the end of an empire, where things were so great, we have this last oomph of momentum that we used to be great, and we felt great, and we don't feel it anymore. So everyone is out searching for it. Well, maybe it's in the best food, or the best clothes, or the best music, or the best movies, or a reality TV show, or another magazine. But you can never get enough of what you don't need. What you need is a strong moral conviction that is pervasive throughout the society, and integrity reigns.
And from then on, from the moment that technique, the state, or production are accepted as facts, it seems right to worship them as facts and try to accommodate ourselves to them. Here we have the essence of a truly modern religion, the religion of the established fact, the fact Moloch, the fact money is taken up and made into a god.
Hundreds of individual embedded diamonds hand embedded into the wood pieces. This is the most expensive bespoke Rolls Royce ever created in history.
It is then imposed on a whole group of people, worldwide, bluntly and simply, because all modern people in their hearts embrace the worship of the fact.
We have a god of money. Of all the gods in Chinese Taoism, there's one god. He's the god of money. Cai Shen Ye. We pray to him.
Fact and truth seem to everyone as one and the same. And if God is no longer true today, it is because he does not look like a fact. Those who question the value of the fact incur the harshest of all reproaches today. Now, thought, life, feelings, everything submits to facts. Many times it seems that the internet is not only used to bring people together, but also to identify those we sternly disagree with and consequently wish to avoid. When we consistently expose ourselves solely to viewpoints we already agree with, over time we often become reluctant to question our own perspectives. Considering other points of view is essential. One of the reasons why is because they are able to find potential weaknesses or fallacies in my reasoning that I would have never found. Does that mean I'm completely abandoning what I believe to be truthful and just at the first sign of criticism? Of course not. Engaging in respectful dialogue with those who hold different beliefs can help bridge divides and build a more cohesive and compassionate society.
But if you look at like some of the most viewed content on YouTube,
I can't even imagine.
When you look at shit that gets 100 million views, 50 million views, 20 million views,
I don't even want to know.
10 million views.
I don't even want to know.
It's watch my wife come from another country review American cereal. 20 million views. You watch, let's set up a dating game where we have a competition where we bring on a bunch of 16-year-olds to date this popular YouTuber 16-year-old. And let's make it a reality. This is the shit, Kardashians. All this shit, it's this mindless, I mean, that's what gets people's attention.
Bubble gum for the brain.
You know, then you got even the last election. What was it? 150 million votes? Less than half.
Fraction.
Less than half the population votes, and that was the biggest election of all time, right?
Biggest turnout ever.
You know, I don't think it's changing. And you look at the content that consumes people, and you start to realize you start to realize how easy it is to manipulate an entire population of 366 million people. It's not much harder than herding sheep or goats or cattle.
In the 1930s, there was a law passed that the United States government shall not participate in any type of misinformation propaganda campaigns directed at its citizens. And in 2012, the Obama administration and the freaking Congress that sat then repealed it. It is legal for the agency, the sister agency, the FBI, and the rest of them to put out intentionally misinformation, propaganda to American citizens now, and has been for 10 years.
Quite why the antennae are so long is something of a mystery. But it's certain that picking up the smell, sound, and taste of a female beetle is a major reason for their incredible length. He's got a female in his sights.
When was the last time you heard any congressperson? They didn't fuss about it back then. They're not fussing about it now. Just like the Patriot Act.
Yeah.
Patriot Act, greatest pull of our freedoms in history. Signed by Bush II. A lot of other people don't know this. There's only 2 presidents in U.S. history to suspend the writ of habeas corpus, the right to due process. George W. So he was the one that created the situation that allowed for locking up January 6 people with no process. George Bush did that. The other one, even bigger lie, Abraham Lincoln.
Really?
Oh, Honest Abe. Probably the most closest thing we ever had to a Caesar in our entire history. He suspended the writ of habeas corpus. Now, at least with George W., it was directed at terrorists. Abraham Lincoln was locking up political opponents, representatives, senators, governors. If you would disagree with Lincoln, he would send generals to your house or military to your house, put you in prison, where you sat for the rest of the war, if they let you out at the end of the war. Lincoln, bro, one of the Republicans' greatest leaders of all time. It's a f***ing lie.
How do you know that? Are you a history buff?
Yeah. Pretty much anything I watch, like YouTube, it's always history stuff. Like, I spent the last couple months watching 1,000 years of Mongol stuff. And the really bad thing is how available the truth is. It's not like you're going to see it on Fox News.
That's what I'm saying, though, Tony. There's a lot of truth out there. It's just nobody takes the time to look. They're too busy watching foreigners review American cereal. And they're too busy watching reality shows of 16-year-olds meet up for a dating game. And that's just how it is. A child can't even make the decision if he or she wants to live with whichever parent when there's a divorce.
But you're saying they can consent to sex or consent to
dismembering themselves.
Melissa was talking about
can't even choose who you want to live with, mom or dad. Court's got to decide.
Right.
But you want to whack your junk off? You want to rip your ovaries out? You can do that.
You can do that.
You want to take puberty blockers? You can do that.
This woman that Melissa was
actually
talking about,
in Washington, the state can confiscate your kid
because you won't let them have that shit.
Yep.
What?
Yeah.
Dude, that is evil.
It's spreading. Evil. And that's where I'm getting. You're starting to see this push happen. It's being pushed. Push. It's spreading. It's moving into Colorado. It's moving into California. It's moving into, I think it's Minnesota. You know, this is all, it's happening fast. It's coming quick.
And they're not even hiding it anymore.
Yeah.
They don't care what we think.
Yeah. You know, part of me thinks it's unfixable. We're so divided now. There's so much hate in the air that I don't think you can fix it with politics. I think the only way that you can start waking people up is by bringing them to something that this country was founded on, and that's God. And hope that people bring their morals back to that.
How many different examples are there that when cultures turn their back on God, they meet their demise?
Because there's a conflict in every human heart between the rational and the irrational, between good and evil. And good does not always triumph.
You asked me two questions, one about Starmer, the other about the program. Let's begin with Starmer. Starmer, as the Baldwin biography makes clear, has fundamental and indeed fundamentalist beliefs. He is a believer in the supremacy of law. That doesn't actually mean the supremacy of law. It means the supremacy of lawyers, of people like him. He believes that basically human society should be constructed according to rules made by people like him, which are enforced by people like him, and prevent anybody else who is not like him from having a say in anything. That's where we are. And it's through the device of this strange thing called human rights law. Now, when Labour sort of pinned its colours to the mast, we are, unlike the wicked Conservatives who were thinking about repealing the European Convention, or the incorporation of the European Convention into English law, we are committed to it, just as Churchill was. The important thing to remember is, since Churchill, in European terms, and since Eleanor Roosevelt, in terms of the Universal Declaration, did their work, human rights have been stood on their head. This is the key to understanding what's gone wrong. Originally, human rights were to protect the rights of you and me against the state. They were there to make sure there wasn't another fascism, there wasn't another Nazism, and if possible, there wasn't another communism. That's what they were there for. Subsequently, they've been perverted. There's been an Orwellian inversion, and instead of the human rights of everybody, you and me, to have freedom of speech, political participation and whatever, human rights have become the rights of minorities against the majority. And the only person, the only thing, the only, as it were, personal entity, in the sense of a corporate person that can enforce the rights of minorities against the majority is the state. Yeah. So human rights have absolutely stood on their head. So they have become deliberately anti-populist. They become anti-democratic. And Starmer, can we give him his proper title? Sir Keir Starmer, KCMG, with a pension so gigantic that it requires a separate act of parliament to protect it, represents this. And everything that Labour does, everything he does, everything that it will do, embodies a particular view of society, and the view that this, have you noticed the language? Public service. Yeah. This mysterious thing, what it really means, it's a bit like human rights or the rule of law. It means the rule of public servants like him, except they're not servants. They're masters. They're a new ruling class. The Labour Party has stood on its head. It's no longer the party, dear me, the working class, these awful people, in the north of England who, a bit patriotic, occasionally wave the Union Jack, and still worse, they sometimes, I can't really mention it politely, they wave St. George's Cross, The Labour Party abominates these people. Yeah. What it actually represents is the public sector, the public white-collar sector, the public sector trade unions, and the whole of the new academic quangocracy. So it's become, very remarkably, it's become the party of the new ruling class.
It's kind of like going into politics.
Right.
You just lose your soul.
What you can tell us about the new Prime Minister?
Nothing. They're all assholes anyway, Every politician in the world is a son of a bitch. Anyway, they're all going to steal your money and raise taxes. It doesn't matter what they say. They're always lying. That's their profession, to be a liar, So you shouldn't expect anything better from any of them, because it never. Have you noticed it never gets better, ever? You go, a new politician, new Labour, Tony Blair, hey, zero, worse than Thatcher.
This is the most dangerous thing about what's going on. It's the perversion of language. It's exactly, again, Orwell foresaw it all. He understood completely that the left proceeds by the manipulation of reality and, above all, the manipulation of language. Again, it sounds mad. It sounds as though I'm subscribing to conspiracist theories, but there's a real sense of, for the first time, overtly, a machinery of repression being created. But you see, I don't think there's anything surprising about this. Starmer, Sugre, I'm sure Robbins, all think they're engaged in doing good. Yeah. They're not wicked. In the same way that the people who tortured and burned people alive in the Spanish Inquisition thought they were doing good because they believe there is only one version of the truth, which is the one they possess. Those of us on the right know there isn't one version of the truth. We know that human beings are profoundly flawed. We know that the last thing government should try to do is to make people perfect, and you accommodate social policy to that. You also recognize that the whole way in which the West has developed, I know it's again intolerable to say why the West is superior to any other civilization, because it's a civilization which depended on debate. It depended on challenge. It depended on arguments being based in reality, this thing you can hit, this thing you can touch.
When you look at young students and you meet them, and they come, if I speak at a university on any topic, but say a military history, they'll say things like, well, wasn't this person bad or racist or sexist? And you say, yes, but let's have a conversation where we can relate to each other, such as, would you please tell me what the Battle of Guadalcanal was like? Nothing. Can you please tell me what the difference between a B-29 and a B-17? Nothing. Can you please tell me who George Patton was? Nothing. Can you tell me what FDR's 4 freedoms were? Nothing. So it's a whole body of knowledge that's disappeared from the college curriculum, and it has to be replaced by what? By students in their young years adjudicating what is good knowledge and what is bad knowledge, but they don't have the tools to make those distinctions other than an ideology that's been infused into them. So the worst combination is arrogance and ignorance. So it's very tragic that we're losing a whole generation of students that are highly opinionated, highly vocal, and yet they don't even have the tools because they haven't had that classical instruction that their teachers did. Many of the teachers who are rebelling against the system were classically trained in languages, philosophy, science, mathematics, and they said, you know what, this was all bias, so I'm going to not teach that. So they really shortchanged this generation. It seems to me they didn't, as good stewards of knowledge, they didn't pass on all of the value that they got. They made an arbitrary decision that they were going to pander to the students, and they destroyed that whole legacy.
That's the mentality. The mentality is, if it's not affecting me, then what do I care?
But do you think there's going to be a point where people will see what you're saying? Or are they seeing that already?
Yeah, they're seeing it already. So let's take a normal community that's not hard left progressive. say, Fresno County or Kings County or Tulare County, where I live. If you go to an average August afternoon, it's about 108, and you will see people going to the local Walmart. And they're not going there to purchase things. They're going there to find free air conditioning because they can't afford, even at subsidized rates for being poor, they can't afford to turn on their air conditioning because the rates are so high. The rates are so high deliberately so that people will not use air conditioning. And they're set by people who live here. Notice in this office, I don't have any air conditioning.
Which we're in Stanford right now.
Yes, we're at Stanford. And so the people who set policy, whether it's on electric prices or fuel prices or the school system, they're never subject to the consequences of their own ideology.
A great book that I recently read, actually at the impetus of my daughter, was called The Myth of Capitalism by Jonathan Tepper. Please read it. Please have your audience read it. And it talks about the real problem in America is that we don't have enough competition amongst industry. And the reason is, and just take a step back and think. You basically have 4 airlines left. And in most of the super hubs, there's 1 or 2 airlines that control most of the slots. Banking, you have 5 of the major banks control about 50% of the nation's savings. You have BlackRock and Vanguard, 2 of the multi-trillion-dollar money management firms controlling a lot of pension money and institutional passive investing money. You have beef processors. You have down to 3 or 4 beef processors. You have thousands of farmers across America. Those are the guys that do the really hard work, raising cows, doing their thing, and they get screwed by the middlemen, the processors. And that's the same for beef, for pork, for poultry. We've allowed, and again, it started really badly in the 80s. And when you look at the wealth inequality in America, it stems from a massive consolidation of businesses down into a few oligarchies. And that's before even tech. We'll talk about tech next. But the basic things of life, insurance. You buy health insurance is regulated state by state by state. And so in your local market, you probably have 1 or maybe 2 insurance providers. You have 1 or 2 hospitals to compete with. The regulations feed the beast of big business, because big business can withstand the delays and all the compliance nonsense that all these extra regulations that Washington continues to pile on onto big business. That's okay. They just stick it to the customers, and they pay higher fees. All the small businesses, the little guys that are starting in their garage or their basement with a good idea, they get squeezed out. They cannot survive it. And so even public companies, you have a significantly less public companies now than you did 20 years ago. You have a consolidation and an elite that are making those big decisions, which is why they feel confident enough that they can have cancel culture and they throw people out of banks if they don't like your politics. The pricing that is charged is they have above market average pricing that they get now versus what they've ever had historically, because of the effectively, it's not a monopoly, but it's an oligopoly. When you have a couple of sellers in the market, it's very easy for them to cooperate and to collude on raising prices to stick it to their customers. Or in some cases, you have what's called a monopsony, which is if they're the sole buyer. So if you have one large factory or an Amazon warehouse that's big in the area, they can really control what pricing gets paid for wages. Why are wages going down or not going up, especially under Dems? It's because they love to flood the market with more and more cheap labor that makes big business happy. They have more and more regulations, which keeps the small guys down and out. That is the paramount question that must be fixed in the American economy, or the American Republic with a really healthy middle class is gone. You're going to have elites and everybody else that is struggling to survive, and that is not what made America great.
Scandal leaves me indifferent, as does reputation. Those are concerns for the petite bourgeoisie, a class to which I do not belong. I was taught proper form, polished to perfection, becomes mystical.
Just like the fishing industry, very few people get wealthy by hunting whales. Most of the revenue comes from smaller fish with large volumes. I guess to Fink, he realized that the future of investing is about tapping into the pockets of smaller investors. Volume over profits. BlackRock soon controls nearly half of the ETFs in America. In 2014 alone, BlackRock raised $103 billion. Shortly, the firm becomes the major shareholder in almost every public company out there.
They have $50 billion in Lockheed Martin and Northrop Grumman each. And it's been the most successful. It's not a bank, it's just an investment company. And it's been the most successful in the world. So it's huge, it's massive.
Larry Fink now has more potential power to influence the US economy than anyone else. He is the JP Morgan of the 21st century.
And we're the largest pension manager in Japan. In Mexico, where we are now becoming, we just did an acquisition, we're going to be the largest asset manager in Mexico. We have one technology pipe worldwide that connects everything we do at the firm.
I'm going to take you on a little journey.
This is a company most people have never heard of, and this company quite literally owns the world. Most US banks are controlled by BlackRock. BlackRock owns all the major pharmaceutical companies. BlackRock owns most of the mainstream media, and BlackRock oversees roughly 10% of all stocks traded worldwide. And this company is now taking over governments. All of this has allowed BlackRock to amass $10 trillion in assets. Yes, trillion. BlackRock is worth half of America's total GDP. It's so crazy that the US and Chinese government now rely on BlackRock to escape recessions, with BlackRock's founder and CEO now sitting on the boards of the influential Council on Foreign Relations and the World Economic Forum. In the words of Henry Kissinger, whoever controls the money controls the world, and no other company in history has had this much global influence. And in 2008, the worst financial crash since the Great Depression struck the world.
Traders say this is the craziest day they have ever seen in these markets. Veteran traders saying they've never seen anything like it. The movement in oil prices so fast.
The most serious recession in decades. And that means life, as most Americans know it, is about to change.
In 1932, in the aftermath of America's great stock market crash, a piece of legislation was passed to protect society. The Glass-Steagal Act was introduced to separate ordinary high street banking from investment banking. 67 years later, in 1999, under the influence of Treasury Secretary Larry Summers and his predecessor Robert Rubin, President Bill Clinton repealed the Glass-Steagal Act. Once again, banks could take ordinary depositors' money and speculate with it on virtually anything they liked. This unfettered gambling pushed the entire global financial system to near collapse. With balances and debt obligations larger than the GDP of entire countries, the banks had become too big to fail. The West was unprepared, and bankers met their reeling and disorientated governments.
You have to bail us out. We need money. If you don't give us the money, the whole thing goes down. And what are you going to do with millions and tens of millions of people who have lost everything in their bank account? You will have a revolution on your hands. So fork over the money. Borrow the money, create it out of nothing, and give it back to us, and so that we can face our problems and not go under, or otherwise. And this is what Mr. Hank Paulson did in the U.S. Congress. He went there one day and he told them, well, look, we need $700 billion. and we need it now, or else.
And the best part is, this was all under Larry's control. Larry Fink's mortgage-backed securities had been the fuse all along. And because Larry Fink knew the 2008 crash would happen, BlackRock's focus on asset management sealed them from the crisis. In fact, this disaster was an opportunity for Larry Fink, because Larry was the only man on Wall Street who could fix this crisis. And so with Larry's personal connections with the Treasury Secretary Timothy Geithner, BlackRock secured an uncontested contract to manage the assets of multiple banks that crumbled during the crisis, exploiting this disaster to become the most powerful man on Wall Street. But still, this was only Wall Street. This still wasn't close to world domination. So how could Larry Fink control governments and the world economy? Well, BlackRock made another breakthrough by offering ETFs. Now, this might sound quite technical, but ETFs are a type of investment fund that puts money into all the companies in a certain industry. And these new investment funds proved wildly popular because of the stability and solid returns. And unsurprisingly, BlackRock became the largest player in this new market, reaching the top of its industry, sucking up money from everywhere using its new money management platform. From the biggest banks to the smallest retirement funds, BlackRock had a hand in it all. BlackRock was starting to control everything. They bought stakes in pretty much every major corporation on the stock market. I mean, if you look into who owns pretty much any major company, you're almost guaranteed to find BlackRock's name. Larry could also see the power technology would have in the future economy, which is why BlackRock poured masses of wealth to build a supercomputer that analyzes what investments will make money. This program, named Aladdin, would go on to manage over $20 trillion worth of assets for BlackRock. For context, $20 trillion is more than the entire United States' GDP. BlackRock would then use this money and its assets to further exert their control over the economy, and now they are inextricably tied to governments. And like 2008, the Federal Reserve hired BlackRock to manage their investments to protect them from coronavirus-led recessions. And BlackRock has used this dependence to grow their empire even further, allowing Larry Fink to be a billionaire oligarch that holds unprecedented power over not just the economy, but the entire world. He controls trends, culture, foreign policy, and the banks. He has world leaders at his beck and call, with BlackRock overseeing assets worth 10% of the world's global economy. BlackRock now owns stakes in every industry, from media companies, banks, oil companies, and weapon manufacturers. And in recent years, the consequences are becoming dire as Larry Fink begins to exert his control over the world. One of the ways BlackRock controls the world so well is through its control of the media. Together with Vanguard, an investment company they also partly own, BlackRock now controls 18% of Fox, 16% of CBS, 13% of Comcast, who themselves own NBC, MSNBC, CNBC, and Sky, and they even own 12% of Disney. This is very important because it means that for any of these companies to decide on company policy, they must now also consult with BlackRock before doing so. And it's just the same with big tech. BlackRock is now the biggest institutional investor in Google, Facebook, Twitter, Amazon, and so many more. I mean, the list of their investments in companies is just endless. And by extending its reach in such a dramatic way, BlackRock now has control over more than 90% of the media. And now with our current recession, BlackRock is buying as much homes and real estate as possible, causing regular house prices to skyrocket. BlackRock profits when a society doesn't own their homes but rents, because BlackRock can squeeze even more money out of the economy through mortgaging off these artificially inflated homes. But this whole situation becomes even more sinister when you realize BlackRock's power is now being compromised by other actors. For example, in August 2020, BlackRock became the first foreign company to be allowed access into China's mutual fund industry. This means that BlackRock can now invest and own parts of Chinese companies. God only knows what BlackRock promised Xi Jinping if they're allowed in. But by being allowed in, BlackRock now works with companies that are blacklisted by the US. One example is BlackRock's investment in a CCP-owned company called Hikvision. Hikvision makes security and communications technology for both civilian and military use by the Chinese government, and they're also known for their wide-scale human rights abuses. But the cherry on top of all of this is that BlackRock is the main force behind the sheepish woke lecturing that tells you how guilty you should feel. In 2018, around the dawn of the new generation of political correctness, Larry wrote a letter telling all the companies under his thumb to, quote, contribute to society or risk losing our support, adding that, quote, society is demanding that companies, both public and private, serve a social purpose. Which is a very interesting statement coming from a company that is quite literally funding the persecution of weaker Muslims and the imprisonment of the Chinese population. A company that is funding a dystopic nuclear regime that is quite literally threatening the very fabric of Western civilization. And so with BlackRock's push for, quote, social purposes, companies now have an ESG score, or in other words, sustainable investing scores, where you have a rating system based on your company's political and social facades. So for example, doing a woke ad for a company like Nike, or silencing any controversial political views on social media will help you get the high ESG score.
they will, on their investor relations page, they'll show you their ESG score. ESG stands for environmental, social, corporate governance. And this is where the woke culture comes from. So they've created this kind of phony baloney rating system that says, well, if you, I'm exaggerating, but if you mention that you are, have a green agenda and you believe in carbon credits and you might trade some credits somewhere, then you get a higher score and therefore you're more investable. And it's very interesting to see how big investors like insurance company, institutional investors, they are steering away from anything that does not have the right ESG rating.
And if the past tells us anything, it seems like BlackRock is only destined to control more and more of our daily lives. Through Larry Fink's close ties with government leaders around the world, with his huge influence over the World Economic Forum, and his position on the boards of the Council on Foreign Relations, BlackRock is only destined to metastasize. So perhaps BlackRock defines the new era of our globalized world, where ruthless, predatory corporations amass more power than countries, where our politics and society isn't dictated by votes, it's dictated by investment boards controlled by BlackRock, delivering us a more generic, mindless, vapid, and vicious culture. Perhaps BlackRock is just a monument to a world divided between too big to fail companies and powerless, moneyless, and joyless citizens, where companies like BlackRock buy up all our houses, inflating our currencies and profit from our conflicts and turmoil. That's why you can't buy a house. That's why we're more divided than ever. That's why too big to fail companies are defining life in the 2020s. Because we no longer live under free market capitalism, we live under a system for socialism for the rich.
We don't want anything like a social credit score, but that's even what our big tech mavens and banking are trying to push here between the BlackRocks and the Vanguards with their ESG scores that they're imposing on any business that if they don't abide by whatever BlackRock wants, they get shut off from the capital markets.
Well, behaviors are going to have to change, and this is one thing we're asking companies. You have to force behaviors, and at BlackRock we are forcing behaviors. 54% of the incoming class are women. We added 4 more points in terms of diverse employment this year, and what we are doing internally is if you don't achieve these levels of impact, your compensation could be impacted. Okay,
we're doing the same thing.
And so it's just you have to force behaviors, and if you don't force behaviors, whether it's gender or race or just any way you want to say the composition of your team, you're going to be impacted, and that's not recruiting, it is development, as Ken said. And ultimately, it's still going to take.
So do you think these elite that you mentioned that live in these areas, do you think they control the state policies?
Yes, absolutely, because of the money. What happened in the 21st century, there were particular people in the bi-coastal area, the east and west coast, the one looking at the EU, the other looking at Asia, who had marketable global skills. So they woke up on some magical date and they discovered that their markets were not 300 million people, but 7 billion. Now, what they called the losers, the deplorables or the irredeemables or the chumps, they were the people that had muscular jobs. And if they were in assembly or manufacturing, they were outsourced or offshored. They were called the losers. But this area, whether it's Facebook, Apple, Google, Twitter, or Stanford University, they expanded exponentially all over the world. And $7 trillion of market capitalization comes into this area. It's the greatest concentration of wealth in the history of civilization. And that created among the people who participate in those, and they're monopolies. Google, I think, controls 90% of all searches. Twitter and Apple have the same type of asymmetrical monopolies in their particular fields. The people who control that then control the politics because they fund it. So if Gavin Newsom is going to be recalled, they pour money in. If in 2020 it looks like there's a chance that Joe Biden might lose, according to Molly Ball of Time magazine, Mark Zuckerberg infused $419 million in pre-selected precincts to absorb the work of the registrars. And so that's how they use their money, because the operating principle is that the skills, the insight that made us anointed financially and globally have given us a birthright, so to speak, to dictate to everybody what they should be doing, with the understanding that sometimes it might not work out like we thought, but we're protected by our money and our influence, and they run the state. The money explains why we have a one-party state. That's not exaggeration. There's not one state Republican office holder. They control, and it's not the Democratic Party, it's the hard left. They control both the state Senate and the state assembly. And I think they control all but 11 congressional seats out of 53. So it's a one-party Confederate system.
We knew the world would not be the same. Few people laughed. Few people cried.
Why are we seeing this gender ideology just consume everything? It's just it's spreading everywhere. It's in schools, it's in advertisements,
my
it's in stores.
uneducated guess is that the massive lobbying and information capacity that was spooled up to promote and get gay marriage approved, when suddenly it was, you had all this idle capacity, and somebody put more funds into it to say, all right, let's push gender. And I think I was talking to a psychiatrist friend of mine, because I asked him, I said, what is causing this gender thing? He said, every decade or so, there's 3% of population that's highly susceptible to suggestion. And in the 90s or the 2000s, it was anorexia and bulimia, and that was the issue that people were wrestling with. And now it's become gender. And so to actualize yourself and to get attention and all the rest, and especially reinforced and amplified by all the maladies and bad things that come with social media, you have this gender cult, which is wrecking society.
You know, you bring up the issue of anorexia, and I think many moms like me are witnessing that actually there are less young women dealing with anorexia today as when we were younger, right. But more of them are now dealing with gender dysphoria. Right. It almost feels like that issue has been replaced with the issue of anorexia has been replaced with gender dysphoria. I don't know if you noticed that too, but I also think of gender dysphoria and, you know, boys wanting to become women, women wanting to become men, going through the chemical castration and the surgical castration. That is also obviously maladaptive. It's certainly not healthy for people's bodies.
Exactly. Well, listen, and in The Consuming Instinct, which was a book I wrote in 2011, in the opening chapter, I say, in many universities, you now teach that homosexuality is innate, whereas heterosexuality is learned as part of the heteronormative imposition. Now, it doesn't take a fancy evolutionary psychologist to know that for a sexually reproducing species, it can't be that homosexuality is natural, whereas heterosexuality is just imposed by heteronormativity. But that's when I started getting the idea for writing The Parasitic Mind, because I would read that stuff. Oftentimes I would be sitting on granting agencies where we are reviewing the research. I'd say, what kind of BS is this stuff? And it's collecting 30 years of these insane stories that led to The Parasitic Mind.
You know, when you talk about collecting stories and just studying history, it makes me think about another maladaptive behavior, which is the erasure of history, right? So the removing of the statutes and the removing of the plaques and the removing of, I mean, frankly, even the Bible, right? This idea that only the new is worth reading, right, and the old is worth throwing away. And how is that not a maladaptive behavior for human society to not learn from the past?
So that's a great question, and I loved your segue. Many ideologies will always start off by erasing past manifestations of history of societies that existed before them, because only when they come to power is when the light is shown, right? So for example, in Islam, what do? you bring down the Buddha statues in the Taliban, right? Wherever Islam goes, you get rid of any artifacts of previous societies because it was darkness before Islam. Now, the progressives in a Western context are doing exactly the same thing. By the way, I'm going to come back to the story. In the happiness book, I talk about how conservative consistently score higher on happiness than progressives. And I offer a speculative, but I think quite plausible explanation, which relates to your question. The conservative wakes up in the morning and says, yeah, our society may not be perfect, but there's a lot of things that are worth conserving. Hence, I'm conservative, right? So existentially, I'm happy. Yes, we can tinker here and we can tinker there, but overall, we have a good system.
It's a happier perspective.
It's a happier perspective. The progressive wakes up and says, we are a racist, misogynist, we had slavery, we indigenous, transgender, Islamophobia. Around the corner lies unicornia. And so if only I can erase everything that is to your question, I get rid of all existing manifestations of the current evil society, around the corner I will have existential glee. And so I think that's why there is that reflex in many of these totalitarian ideologies to erase everything that came before you.
Do you think that conservatives do have some maladaptive behaviors too? I mean, are we, I don't know, angrier? I'm trying to think what the left would say about us.
Look, I don't think your political orientation inoculates you against all possible traps of life, right? So for example, in my field, conservatives are much more likely to deny evolution, whereas liberals and progressives are much more likely to deny evolutionary psychology. Now, why? The conservatives usually detest evolution because they see it as a frontal attack on their religious beliefs. Don't tell me that there is an impartial, random mechanism that created the beauty of that flower. It must be a manifestation of a godly designer. And so I don't believe in your evolution nonsense. That's the conservative who says that to me. The leftist says to me, oh, no, I believe in evolution. I just don't believe when you apply evolution to explain the human mind. Don't tell me that there are innate sex differences between men and women. That's Nazism. Men and women are only different through social construction. So I just gave you an example where both camps could be equally imbecilic for different reasons. So I don't think being conservative or liberal inoculates you against parasitic ideas, although in the book, all of the parasitic ideas are inherently leftist because I come from the university ecosystem, and the university ecosystem is largely inhabited by leftist professors. So that's why all of those parasitic ideas come from the left. Going back to Seneca several thousand years ago, he's got a great quote, which I use as an epigraph in one of the chapters in the happiness book. I don't remember the exact quote, so I'm going to paraphrase it. He says that when you look at a tree, the trees that have been exposed to a lot of wind stressors end up being very well rooted because they have to evolve the capacity to be able to withstand, in this case, a singular stressor called, wind velocity. Trees that haven't been exposed to a lot of wind stressors end up being very brittle. And now you take that principle, which was an incredible insight from 2,500 years ago, and now you apply it in today's parlance. You have Nassim Taleb, who's a fellow Lebanese, who talks about anti-fragility. Well, Seneca already said it 2,500 years ago. Many systems will optimally operate if they are exposed to stressors. So when you reduce the standards, you are removing the stressors that allow you to optimally flourish. So let me give you a specific example from evolutionary medicine. It turns out that kids who are raised in environments with no allergens, no pet dander, no dust, they're not growing up on a farm, end up having a lot greater incidence of asthma than kids who did grow up with those allergens. Why? Because your immune system expects in order for it to operate maximally, it needs to face those stressors, in this case, allergens, right? So now let's apply it to university settings. If you're not willing to be exposed to stressors called opposing ideas, because any opposing idea becomes a violence to me, because you should exactly believe as I do, how can you become a critical thinker? Because I'm a much better critical thinker if I'm exposed to opposing ideas that allows me to better hone my message. against those ideas. So you're exactly right. Lowering the standards, removing the stressors, creating an environment that is not anti-fragile is not the way for optimal flourishing.
Good. So maybe you can explain to me, why do we have a woke mind virus going through our society? I mean, so much of it is in your Parasitic Mind book. And so
right.
What is this parasitic mind that we have developed here in the West?
So I've been now a professor. I'm going into my 31st year. There are many wonderful things in the university setting, but I very quickly noticed that some of the supposedly brightest people on earth, they're called professors, can come up with some of the dumbest and most insane ideas, because all of those parasitic ideas, postmodernism, cultural relativism, radical feminism, social constructivism, were all spawned on university campuses. So why? What's so alluring about these ideas?
So can you give me some examples of what you have noticed that are particularly parasitic?
Yes.
I know I have my choice of them, and I'm going to ask you about them, but some of the ones that you talked about in your books are so jarring and so obvious, I think, to some of us. But you came out with this book a while ago.
Right. So the granddaddy of all parasitic ideas is postmodernism, because it purports that there are no absolute truths other than the one absolute truth that there are no absolute truths. So imagine how anti-scientific that statement is, because a scientist wakes up in the morning and says that, yes, there is a truth to be discovered. Now, in science, truth can change. It's always provisional truth. What we thought was true in science 300 years ago, we've revised since. But we do operate on the premise that there is an epistemologically findable truth. Otherwise, there's no point in getting out of bed in the morning. Well, postmodernism is the antithesis of that. It says we are completely shackled by subjectivity. We're completely shackled by biases, by relativism. And so you can't speak of any absolute truth. Well, that's the framework that then allows a lot of the other parasitic ideas to flourish. If there is no truth with a capital T, then surely your genitalia doesn't define whether you're male or female. It's my feeling that defines whether I'm male or female. Surely there is no such thing as innate sex differences between men and women. That must be a social construction. So it all originally flows from that framework that says up is down, left is right. Who are you to say what is right or wrong? And so that's why I think there is no greater parasitic ideology than postmodernism. And to me, it seemed insane. So you think that biology applies to every single species on Earth except one, called humans? Somehow humans operate outside of their biology. So the original parasitic thinking that I was exposed to was in the pursuit of my academic career. And then the longer I stayed within the university ecosystem, I started seeing these departures from reason, left, right, and center, eventually culminating in writing The Parasitic Mind.
Here we are again, bro. Just you and me. Same kind of moon, same kind of jungle. Real number 10 night, remember?
Welcome. If you've read the espionage novels of John le Carré, you know that no other writer today has so brilliantly evoked the subterranean workings of government, perhaps because he himself was once a British spy. Le Carré has a name for that invisible labyrinth of power. He calls it the deep state. And now, an American you're about to meet in this broadcast has seized on that concept to describe the forces he says are controlling our government, no matter the party in power. But Mike Lofgren's no intelligence agent, although he had a top-secret security clearance. He's a numbers man, a congressional staff member for 28 years with the powerful House and Senate budget committees. Over the years, as he crunched those numbers, he realized they didn't add up. Instead, they led him to America's own deep state, where elected and unelected figures collude to protect and serve powerful vested interests. Mike Lofgren was so disgusted, he not only left Capitol Hill, he left the Republican Party and wrote this book, The Party is Over, How Republicans Went Crazy, Democrats Became Useless, and the Middle Class Got Shafted. Now, at our request and exclusively for BillMoyers.com, he has written Anatomy of the Deep State. You'll want to read it as soon as we finish this conversation. Mike Lofgren, welcome.
Good to be here again, Bill.
This is a difficult subject to talk about. It would be easier if it were a conspiracy you're describing, but that's not the case, is it?
No, I'm not a conspiracy theorist. This is not some cabal that was hatched in the dark of night. This is something that hides in plain sight. It's something we know about, but we can't connect the dots, or most people don't connect the dots. It's kind of a natural evolution when so much money and political control is at stake in the most powerful country in the world. This has evolved over time.
And you call it the real power in the country.
Correct. It is a hybrid of corporate America and the national security state. Everyone knows what the military-industrial complex is, since Eisenhower talked about it in his farewell address.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. We must never let the weight of this combination endanger our liberties or democratic processes.
Everyone knows Wall Street and its depredations. Everyone knows how corporate America acts. They're both about the same thing. They're both about money, sucking as much money out of the country as they can, and they're about control, corporate control and political control.
You said this, in your judgment, is the big story of our time.
It is the big story of our time. It is, I would say, the red thread that runs through the history of the last 3 decades. It's how we had deregulation, financialization of the economy, the Wall Street bust, the erosion of our civil liberties, and perpetual war.
You write that the secret and unaccountable deep state floats freely above the gridlock between both ends of Pennsylvania Avenue is the paradox of American government in the 21st century.
Well, that's just the thing. The common narrative of the last 5 years, and on a superficial level it's right, is that government is broken, it's dysfunctional, it's gridlocked. Well, that's true, and that is the visible government, the constitutional government we learn about in Civics 101, and it is gridlocked. But somehow Obama can go into Libya, he can assassinate U.S. citizens, he can collect all our phone records without a by your leave from anyone. He can even bring down a jet carrying a president of a sovereign country without asking anyone's permission, and no one seems to connect the two. The failure of our visible constitutional state and this other government that operates according to no constitutional rules or any constraint by the governed.
You go on to say, though, that it's not just the executive branch that is the heart of this, that it's just one of the several constituencies that make up what you call the deep state.
Well, it's all the national security functions of the government. It's the Pentagon, it's Homeland Security, it's the State Department. It's also Treasury, because they have a kind of symbiotic relationship with Wall Street.
For one thing, they control the flow of money.
Absolutely. And that's why there's such a flow not only of money, but of personnel between Wall Street and the Treasury Department. There's other aspects of government. There's a portion of the judiciary, a small portion of the judiciary, the so-called foreign intelligence surveillance courts. Most of Congress doesn't even know how they operate.
Talk a little bit more about the nexus, the connection between the national security state and Wall Street, because this is a theme that runs through your essay.
Do you know that about 30 blocks north of here, there is a restaurant that will sell you a truffle for $95,000? Also in New York, Christie's sold at auction a painting by Francis Bacon for $142 million. Now, a parallel situation with the national security state, the NSA spent $1.7 billion to build a facility in Utah that will collect 1 yottabyte of information. That's as much information as has ever been written in the history of the world. In both cases of the national security state and the corporate state, they are sucking money out of the economy as our infrastructure collapses. We have a tinker toy power grid that goes out every time there's inclement weather. Tens of millions of people are on food stamps. We incarcerate more people than China, an authoritarian state with 4 times our population. Does anyone see the disparity between this extravagance for the deep state and the penury that is being forced on the rest of the country? That isn't a natural evolution. Something made it happen. We're having a situation where the deep state is essentially out of control, it's unconstrained. Since 9/11, we have built the equivalent of 3 Pentagons around the DC metropolitan area, holding defense contractors, intelligence contractors, and government civilians involved in the military-industrial complex. There are over 400,000 contractors, private citizens, who have top-secret security clearances.
And they are heart and soul of the deep state, as you describe it.
Absolutely.
They're being privatized, which means the power shifts from accountable officials to unaccountable contractors.
About 70% of the intelligence budget goes to contracts.
You say that you came to question this. It took you a while. It was a gradual enlightenment that took place. You were dealing with big numbers and particular details in the budgets that all of these agencies were sending to you when you were on Capitol Hill, right? You were seeing the numbers.
Absolutely.
What was happening to the numbers?
At the end of 2001 is we appropriated a lot of money, and it didn't seem to be going to Afghanistan, the proximate source of the 9/11 attacks. It seemed to be going to the Persian Gulf region, and I said, what's going on here? Saddam Hussein didn't bring down the Twin Towers. So the little light went on, and I began to sort of disenchant myself from the normal groupthink that tends to take over in any organization.
Groupthink. At some point in your essay, you talk about how groupthink drives the deep state.
It absolutely does, just as it tends to drive any bureaucratic organization.
What do you mean by groupthink?
Well, the psychologist Irving Janis called it groupthink. It's a kind of assimilation of the views of your superiors and your peers. It's becoming a yes man. And in many respects, it's an unconscious thing.
I remember what Upton Sinclair once said, it's difficult to get a man to understand something when his salary depends on him not understanding it.
Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair.
Digital ID for me is a very big part of the future, and let me explain why. So your digital ID can play a part in COVID, but also if you think of the transactions that you want to do now with your customers, it's much simpler for them if they have a digital identity. Or you take the big issue in the Western world today, which is, quite apart from COVID, I would say is worries about immigration, who has the right to be in your country, who has the right not to be. Without a form of identity, it's very hard to tell who's got a right to be in a country, who's not. So inevitably, governments are going to move in this direction. Absolutely inevitably.
So that's sort of how you could see globalists, if that's how you would describe Tony Blair, responding to this kind of unrest. Whether it's COVID, commerce, or civil unrest, digital ID and civilian management is a good idea.
Google, get this, may be tracking you even when your phone is not connected. How is that, you wonder? Well, the company collects data and then uses that to sell targeted ads to users. The business model is called surveillance capitalism. But does that data collection work even when your phone is disconnected or on airplane mode? Fox News Headlines 24/7 anchor Brett Larson did some investigating on Tucker Carlson's show this week, and you join us here with some answers. And you guys found some pretty startling stuff.
It was very startling. And mind you, we all know that Google is keeping an eye on us. We knew that going into this. They've been keeping an eye on us online for years. But now that they have a mobile operating system, exactly what do they know about where we're going? Take a look. We know that Google is tracking us. We agree to it when we set up our phones. So we wanted to figure out what exactly Google is learning about us throughout the day. So here's what we're going to do. We have two identical phones. The only difference between these two phones is this one is in airplane mode. Both of the phones lack a SIM card, and they haven't been set up to access any Wi-Fi networks. So for all intents and purposes, these phones have no connection to a data network. We're going to keep them with us throughout the day. And while I travel around DC, we're going to figure out just what Google is finding out about me.
Our first stop, Sim's convenience store, just outside our Fox bureau, for a quick coffee. From there, we took a walk to the Capitol and took a quick walk around the Senate office buildings, and then decided to hop in a car and head around town.
Hello. We're going to the Children's Hospital, please.
To run our test, we had to do more than walk the block, so we took a tour around our nation's capital. First, due north to the Children's National Medical Center Hospital, then west to St. Albans School and the National Cathedral. Our tour around town was a 14-mile journey that lasted more than an hour. The entire time, the phones had no access to the internet.
Oh my goodness.
Not a Wi-Fi connection and not any cellular data service. It almost seemed quaint to assume that Google wouldn't even be able to collect data on me.
Let's head back to the bureau, my friend. That church is beautiful.
Google's business model is simple. Collect data on its users and then use that data to sell targeted ads. It's a business model called surveillance capitalism. But does that critical data collection work even when your phones aren't connected?
So we're back here at our Fox Bureau in DC, and we've got both of our phones exactly how we left with them. The only difference, really, I snapped a couple of bad selfies at the National Cathedral. But otherwise, they have stayed in my pocket for the entire day. So let's find out what they know. This is our man-in-the-middle device. It's basically a Wi-Fi network that these phones are going to connect to once we turn their Wi-Fi on. It's going to pass data through it on the way to Google. But on the way, we're actually going to get a copy of the same data that Google's going to get. We'll be able to decrypt it and then find out where we've been throughout the day.
Within minutes, the numbers rolled in. The phone that wasn't on airplane mode registered more than 100 locations, 130 activities, and even 152 barometric readings. As soon as it hooked up to our Wi-Fi, it transmitted 300 kilobytes of data straight to Google. The phone even logged our exact locations, tracking us all around town, the Capitol, the hospital, the school, and the cathedral.
Now you may notice what's missing here is the exact route that we took, but it got that data too. It knows when I got out of the car.
The metadata has a time log down to the very second, tracking everything when they think that you're walking, riding, and yes, even getting out of the car.
Okay, so you're thinking, this isn't a big deal. I'll just put my phone in airplane mode. Yeah, we thought of that too. This is the other phone that we had with us that no SIM card also remained in airplane mode the entire time. Let's see what kind of data it captured.
The phone with airplane mode activated actually logged more locations and activities than the other phone, and it also transferred hundreds of kilobytes of data to Google as soon as it was activated.
The only thing that's missing from this map is our stop at the Children's Hospital, but it still knows we were there. There it is. Exiting vehicle, 100% accuracy.
Through complicated user agreements and free software, Google gets users to sign away their privacy for nothing. They're even following you in the places that most people would expect total privacy: government buildings, a children's hospital, a private school, a church. Every move you make, every step you take, Google is watching you.
Now I'm running out of time. I'm going to just kind of try to help you to comprehend the world that you are living in now and you're going to live in the rest of your lives. Twitter was developed as a weapon. Facebook was developed as a weapon. They were developed as weapons by the CIA. Google is powered by the CIA. Google was created at Stanford using CIA funding. CIA transferred the technology for Google Maps. That's where it comes from. Okay? So what am I talking about? Here's an example. The example that demonstrates how powerful this tech is what transpired with Arab Spring. Arab Spring was the first clear, unequivocal fifth-generation warfare battle that was won. Repeated regime change, starting with Tunisia. The thing is that with these social media platforms, the tech exists. I know this because I used to support a client that built some of this tech called Behavioral Matrix. With the words that you post on social media or any media platform, they can extract your emotional state. It's all validated using statistics. The words that you use can be used to basically peer into your mind, to extract your emotional state and then map it in a cloud of influence with the other people that you're interacting with on social media. And that cloud, statistically validated cloud of interactions, can be used to pull out those within that sphere that are expressing emotions and thoughts that those that are managing it wish to elevate or suppress. You ever heard of shadow banning? Shadow banning is just part of the toolkit. Okay? Those influencers can be manipulated so that they are more widely circulated and influencing that cloud, or less so. It can be manipulated so that you can pick out voices that are saying, we need to go attack the palace, or we need to all meet here, or whatever the thing is, and then propagated through that entire matrix. You asked for examples, okay? This is how this tech was built as a weapon. It can move populations, and did so, clearly documented during Arab Spring, to result in multiple examples of regime change. Extremely powerful. Grease lightning. What's not to like if you're the CIA? And we didn't have to go shoot missiles. We didn't have to shoot guns. But this tech, remember, if you're interacting on your little social media platform that you call your cell phone, and there's 2, or even better, 3 cell towers within range, you can be precisely triangulated in 3-dimensional space. You can be kinetically targeted with extreme precision, and that database all gets linked to Gorgon Stare. These are the high-resolution satellite imagery technology that exists. So who you are, what you look like, what your vehicle is, who you're associated with, what you're saying on social media, all that stuff is captured and tracked and weaponized. All great, if this is your business.
In early 2018, Facebook's data harvesting secrets were revealed to the world in the Cambridge Analytica scandal. Data from 87 million people had been used in a psychological profiling system, and this had been used to probe for people's weaknesses to targeted advertising and political campaigns. One employee came forward to say this on the program: "We exploited Facebook to harvest millions of people's profiles and built models to exploit what we knew about them and target their inner demons." But unsurprisingly, Facebook was unapologetic. They said that people had handed over their data freely and had consented to this. They even banned the whistleblower from Facebook, Instagram, and even WhatsApp. The world was furious, and the controversy led to the famous Senate hearings with Mark Zuckerberg. But at Facebook, it was all just a bump in the road, because Mark Zuckerberg was now ready to move on to the third stage of how WhatsApp would make its money, by turning WhatsApp's data into an algorithmic goldmine. With the founders out of the picture, Facebook now had free reign over WhatsApp. and Zuckerberg would turn this into his own data harvesting machine. But when they weren't losing the data they got from WhatsApp, they were selling it. They sold it to Bing, and then Bing would use this to personalize search results based on people's Facebook information. Facebook would then make deals with companies like Netflix and Spotify to let their algorithms read users' private messages. They then let the Russian search engine Yandex make indexes of people's identities and public profiles in order to personalize their results. And the most egregious of all is that Facebook even let the Chinese tech giant Huawei pull data from their apps while the app was being used on their devices, all going back to the Chinese government. There's a whole slew of other people using this data, from politicians, governments, big business. I mean, Facebook's main revenue comes from advertisers who are desperate to know everything about you. Also that they can monetize this information by making targeted ads more and more specific. Anything they learn allows them to build their profile on you, and the more complete a picture they have of you, the more likely you are to buy whatever they're selling. And all of this information came out in the wake of the Cambridge Analytica scandal. However, these are only glimpses of the massive data machine that WhatsApp has facilitated, which is scary because WhatsApp is now approaching the 3 billion user mark today, meaning Facebook has access to almost half the world's personal information. And now that they've consolidated their hold over WhatsApp, they're starting to exploit it to the fullest. After implementing the controversial privacy changes, advertisement revenue jumped to its highest ever for Facebook. Across all their platforms, they made nearly $115 billion in 2021. And all of this is possible because of WhatsApp. It gives Facebook access to billions of people. These people then give them data, and then this fuels Facebook's data machine empire. Although it never seemed like it on the surface, WhatsApp was easily worth the billions that Facebook paid for it. For one, it gave the company a much more secure future. WhatsApp gives Facebook's data machine access to billions of people, and in return for this, Facebook can keep the service as a free alternative, undercutting the competition and ensuring Facebook maintains its monopoly. And even if Facebook itself keeps losing popularity, they'll still always have WhatsApp, their golden goose. And as long as it remains on people's phones, Facebook will always have the fuel for its algorithmic money-making machine.
And then along comes UKIP, Nigel Farage, and Brexit. Okay? And oops, it got turned on its head. Cambridge Analytica and the Trump election, oops, got turned on its head. And suddenly, the intelligence community realized they had a problem. And that was embodied in, for instance, in one example, in the Obama lectures that were given at the Hoover Institute, in which he justified the need for censorship and propaganda. Okay? They believe that because of these capabilities and the risks, because underneath the risk of Brexit, the realization of Brexit was Frexit and Grexit and the destruction of the European Union that we've so carefully created. And if the EU falls, NATO falls, and American foreign policy is destroyed. And that's why they feel that it's absolutely necessary and justified to do this. But the problem is, as I said, is the slippery slope. Once they're doing it for that reason, then they're doing it for this reason, then they're doing it because of vaccine hesitancy and anti-vaxxers, then they're doing it for climate change deniers, then they're doing it for people that are in the opposite political party. Dr. Malone, a conservative. Okay? Now, I've run out of time. So much more I can cover. The book is, I think, 130,000 words. Extensive documentation of the technology and the means and the logic and what this is being used to drive the interface with the World Health Organization, with the United Nations. If you haven't heard what Agenda 2030 is, you better figure it out. It's considered an international treaty, by the way. Among other things, in Agenda 2030 is the assertion is that it's a fundamental human right to migrate and live wherever in the world you want. Okay? A lot of these things that you encounter, open borders, it just doesn't make sense, right? No, it's codified specifically in Agenda 2030. This is the new world order that you have to deal with. I'm going to be dead. Okay? All I can do is what I'm trying to do right now is to help teach reach you, and this is a powerful group. What Mises has assembled here, I'm really impressed with. I'm impressed with seeing all of you having these deep intellectual conversations over burgers about all kinds of things. It's just fantastic. And I can tell you that this kind of thing is starting to happen all across the Western world. It's happening that the people that are driving the populist movement in Europe are the people that are your age. The people that are voting for the Alliance for Deutschland, a party that has been made illegal in the state of Germany. Here's a fun fact. If you fly the German flag in Germany, you're considered a neo-Nazi. If you support nationalism, you're considered a neo-Nazi. That's where this has gone in Europe. And it's folks your age that are starting to stand up and say, no, this is not the world we want to live in. We don't want to live in a world dominated by surveillance capitalism and that logic. And I hope that this little time that I've spent with you, I've helped to at least pique your curiosity. What the heck is this guy talking about? He sounds like a crazy, wild-eyed conspiracy theorist. Okay? And it does sound that way. But it's all real. It's all documented. This is what's going on underneath. This is the world that you're inheriting. And my challenge and question to you is, what are you going to do about it?
Yeah, well, I get to hear your stories. What's your new one about?
Oh, it's about a guy who thinks he's a knight in shining armor. The only thing is he lives in a world where knights don't exist anymore.
Kinda sounds like my world.
This ain't no ancient culture here, mister.
Sometimes it is.
Make my stand with you, side by side, to the end. To the end. We're all bloody end. Daft buggers. We finished this.